I'm now going to introduce you to Sara Larson, who is the co-founder and executive director of Awake. Some of you might be familiar with Awake, and I know some of you from the US are directly connected with it as well. It's a US-based community of abuse survivors, concerned Catholics and allies, responding to the wounds of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. As part of Awake's ministry, Sara accompanies many men and women who have experienced sexual abuse by Catholic leaders. She is honored to offer a presentation shaped by this witness and wisdom of these courageous lives. Sara, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tina, and thank you to all of you for being here. I am so grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you today. First, I want to say it's such a privilege to share this time with Sister Tressa. As we corresponded in preparation for this conference, I was struck by the similarity between our approaches, even as we operate in such different contexts. I was also moved by the powerful testimony of the religious sisters who spoke this morning about violence in the context of war, trafficking, and immigration. I noted Sister Abby's words and echo them in regards to abuse in the context of the Catholic Church. As people of faith, we cannot look away. I have to confess, I am a little bit intimidated to be speaking today, partly because of all the brilliant, thoughtful people sitting in this room here, but even more so because of all the people who are part of the Awake community who are watching this talk right now on our organization's watch party on Zoom. Many of them are abuse survivors who are engaged with Awake. And while the audience here in Rome is certainly important, what's most important to me is what those survivors think, whether Vince and Allison, Colin, Lisa, and Amy, and so many others that are watching today, that they feel that I've respected and honored their dignity and their stories. You see, these survivors are the real experts, and everything I'm sharing today, I have learned from them. I am simply a servant of their stories. So to all of those survivors watching back home, it's truly an honor to walk with you, to listen and learn from each one of you. Thank you for trusting me to walk alongside you. So I was asked today to speak about accompanying women who have been abused in the context of the Catholic Church. So I'm going to begin today with telling you a little bit about one abuse survivor who is a member of the Awake community. While I have the permission of this survivor to speak about her today, I'm going to use the name Nicole to protect her privacy. So Nicole was abused by her parish priest when she was 16 years old, after she went to talk to him about her depression and her difficult home life. Under the guise of counseling, that priest told her he was in love with her, and she was left feeling scared and confused as he abused her over the course of several months. The next year, she told a missionary priest who was passing through her parish about what had happened, and they proceeded to exchange letters over the course of several months. When he saw her in person again, he sexually assaulted her. Years later, as an adult, she trusted another priest with her story, and he proceeded to abuse her too, under the pretense of helping her learn how to protect herself. It's truly a horrendous story, and I could share so many more stories like this in greater detail, but I'm here today to focus not on horror, but on humanity and on hope. Nicole is so much more than her story of abuse. Nicole has a master's degree in pastoral counseling and spiritual care. She is the proud grandmother of 2 adorable little boys who are the light of her life. She is full of wisdom and faith and strength, and is one of the most compassionate and thoughtful people I know. Nicole first reached out to Awake back in 2022, when we were still a small local organization called Awake Milwaukee. At that point, she had told very few people about her experiences of abuse, and she felt deep shame at what had happened, believing it was somehow her fault. Nicole said the most challenging thing about her abuse was, quote, how persistent the effects of the abuse have been and the myriad ways it has permeated my life and relationships. It's been hard to have spent so much of my adult life in therapy and yet continue to struggle with feelings of shame and pain from these experiences. The effects are so deep-seated that subconsciously I still question what is inherently wrong with me that both caused these events to occur and for me to not be over it by now. In the 3 years since Nicole first connected with Awake, I have been privileged to walk closely with her through individual conversations, one of our ongoing support groups that we call Survivor Circles, and our annual weekend retreat. The experience of connecting with other survivors for the first time in a survivor circle has been particularly powerful for her. Here's what she said about this. What I love about our circle is that we can show up with whatever is going on, and we are accepted and supported regardless. It is truly a blessing. It is so helpful to be able to have feelings validated by other survivors who understand and have many of the same feelings. Being a part of Awake and hearing from other survivors has helped me to see that I am not alone in this. After a few years of being involved with Awake, Nicole made the courageous step to tell her story publicly as part of our Survivor Stories feature on the Awake blog. When we asked her why she did this, after so many years of silence, she said, "First and foremost, I chose to share my story with the hope that something in it might help another survivor. I want other survivors to be reassured that what happened was not their fault, that they are not alone, and that they are both lovable and loved. Secondly, my hope is to promote learning in the Catholic community for both priests and lay people about what it is like to be a survivor, and in particular, to help them better understand the long-lasting effects that abuse has on survivors." Nicole also participated recently in a bridge dialogue, Awake's restorative justice initiative, bringing together priests and abuse survivors for honest conversations. This year, she even stepped up to co-lead one of our survivor circles, where she provides a supportive, compassionate presence to her fellow survivors as one more way of giving back. Now, I would like to tie this all up in a neat bow and say that Nicole has been completely healed and no longer suffers from the impacts of her abuse, but that wouldn't be true. Nicole still really struggles sometimes with the clergy abuse she experienced and with the harmful ways church leaders have often handled abuse. While Nicole maintains a deep faith, these issues have pushed her out of the church she once called home. When we approach Holy Week each year, we invite survivors in our community to gather online and talk about how this time of year is impacting them. Nicole always tears up when speaking about how much she misses the Holy Week liturgies and what it was like to be part of a parish community. She is still sad and angry sometimes at how much the abuse has taken away from her in so many ways, and the trauma lingers even decades later. So I can't tell you that everything has been fixed for Nicole, but I will say that I have been amazed and humbled to see all the ways she has grown over the past few years and the way she keeps on taking brave steps to seek wholeness and peace. When I asked Nicole for permission to speak about her in this talk, she was so gracious in agreeing. She said, "I've worked really hard on reminding myself that I should not feel I have to be so secretive anymore. I've lived too many years of my life with too many secrets, which caused a lot of unnecessary pain and shame. So yes, feel free to talk about me." And then she let me know she would be praying for me. Sometimes we can be tempted to speak about abuse survivors as a group, as if they are simply statistics on a spreadsheet. So I started with Nicole's story to humanize the reality of abuse in the church. But of course, each survivor's journey is unique, so I hope we can recognize that this is just one story among many, far too many around the world. Now, before I move on to share some of the principles underlying Awake's model of accompaniment, I think it would be helpful to share a bit of background about myself and about our organization. So I was born and raised Catholic and have spent my whole life deeply committed to the Catholic Church. In 2018, I was working in parish ministry in a job I loved and thought I would continue doing for a long time. To be honest, I had never thought that much about abuse in the church. I think that, subconsciously at least, I bought into a narrative that I think is very common among Catholics in the United States today, which goes something like this. Sexual abuse in the church was a terrible thing. It happened a long time ago. Then we found out about it and we fixed it, and now we can move on. It's a bit embarrassing to say that now, but I simply wasn't paying attention. In fact, I was part of what Sister Nirmala referred to yesterday as the deafening silence when it comes to supporting those who have experienced abuse in the church. Then the summer of 2018 hit, and headlines in the United States highlighted the Pennsylvania grand jury report, which outlined decades of abuse and cover-up by church leaders, as well as the revelations about former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. All of this news hit me like a punch in the gut, and I began to really wrestle with these painful realities in the church that I love. I wonder if some of you here today have had a similar experience, a moment when it became clear that God was calling you to do something to address abuse in your own context and in your own way. For me, that meant leaving my job in parish ministry and beginning to gather with fellow Catholics who were also feeling sad and angry and stirred to action. When we started meeting in my living room in March 2019, we had no idea where our conversations would lead. But we stepped forward in faith and founded a small local ministry that we called Awake. 6 years later, we're now a national nonprofit organization that reaches survivors and concerned Catholics throughout the United States and beyond, which is what brings me to speak with you today. I have just a few simple slides for the rest of the presentation, and they all feature photos of survivors from the Awake community. Each one of these people has a name and story, just like Nicole, and I want to keep their faces front and center as I speak, to remind all of us of the very real people who are impacted by abuse in our church. In a moment, I am going to tell you a little bit about what we at Awake have learned from listening to survivors, but I have 3 quick notes to offer some context before I go on. First, Awake has been developed in the context of the United States, and while we have participants from other parts of the world, I know that there are significant differences in the reality of abuse in other cultural contexts. So I speak in the hope that some of our general principles might apply to your work in your part of the world, and I invite you to consider what might need to be adapted to your own national or cultural context. Second, I want to note that when Awake speaks about sexual abuse in the church, we use an inclusive understanding that abuse can be perpetrated not only by priests and bishops, but also by deacons, religious men and women, and lay ministers of all kinds. We also recognize that abuse by a trusted religious leader is devastating, no matter the age this abuse occurs. So we always include those who are abused as children, as teens, and as adults, knowing that all have been deeply betrayed by someone they should have been able to trust. As a side note, we never use the term vulnerable adults because so many survivors of adult abuse find it offensive. And we recognize that all people can be vulnerable to abuse in particular situations, relationships, or times in their life. Finally, you'll notice I use the word survivor throughout this presentation. I know that different words are customary in various parts of the world, and even in the United States, there is no single term that is agreed upon by all. However, when we surveyed 73 people who had experienced abuse in the church, survivor was the term preferred by the majority, with victim survivor being a distant second and victim being the least preferred term. So we have chosen to use the word survivor in all of our work. So with those 3 notes in place, I want to offer 4 key principles that we have learned from our own journey with abuse survivors. First, humility. It can be tempting when someone is hurting or in need of assistance for Christians to approach them with an attitude of superiority, a sense that I know what to say and do, and they are simply passive recipients of my help, whose role is mostly to be grateful. But we believe that it's essential to approach survivors from a stance of deep humility, understanding that they are the experts on their own journey, and that we are simply called to walk alongside them and offer whatever help we can. We begin with listening, and we seek to respond to the needs they express, not ones that we invent based on our own assumptions. We know that we are not perfect and will make many mistakes along the way, so we regularly seek survivors' feedback on everything we do and work to create an atmosphere where they truly feel able to share criticism and suggestions for improvement and know that their thoughts will be taken seriously. We apologize when we need to, then we learn and try to do better. After humility, the next thing I would share is sensitivity to religious trauma. So the idea of trauma-informed care has gained a lot of traction in the United States, at least in recent years, and we believe that it's absolutely essential that we have a basic understanding of trauma and seek to create a trauma-sensitive environment in everything we do. One particular aspect of trauma that we have learned to pay special attention to among those who have been abused by religious leaders is religious trauma. Because of the way that spirituality is often distorted and misused by abusers, we have learned that anything associated with God and religion is potentially triggering. So we seek to create environments that reduce some of these possible triggers and support people when they do feel triggered nonetheless. This changes the words we use in prayer, the way we speak about the church, and how we share the love of God. When religious people enter into relationship with those who have been abused in the church, we need to recognize that our own religious practices and language, no matter how meaningful they are to us, might be painful to others. As one small example, one of the most treasured prayers for many Catholics is the Our Father. But I am very cautious about using that prayer when I am with clerical abuse survivors, because for many who were abused by men who bore the title of Father, this prayer itself can be a trigger. I have learned that I need to have the humility to allow people to connect with God in a way that is safe for them, that doesn't trigger memories of their trauma, rather than imposing my own spirituality upon them. Many of these survivors have had their hearts broken by the church, not just by their abuser, but by church leaders who too often have failed to listen, to offer support, and to welcome their presence and their stories. Many maybe even most, report that the response of the church when they reported their abuse was just as traumatizing as the abuse itself, and often more. During this conference, it has been beautiful for me to listen to the witness of so many faithful women who are walking alongside those who have experienced abuse and violence in many contexts. And I also can't help but imagine my friends who have been abused by priests, religious sisters, and lay leaders sitting in this room and wondering, where are those who will walk alongside us? Why does a church that does so much good in the world seem so blind to the suffering of those who have been harmed within the church? I think that many of these survivors would echo the words of Sister Theodora in the previous question and answer session, where she said, "Don't forget about us." The third principle I want to highlight is freedom and autonomy. Yesterday, many of the reports from the working groups spoke about empowerment as an important goal in safeguarding work, and I couldn't agree more. We must respect the freedom and autonomy of each person who encounters Awake, trusting them to judge for themselves what is right for them at this moment in their journey. This is especially important because abuse is a situation in which freedom and autonomy are taken away from someone. So we want to do the exact opposite. Create a space where each person is encouraged to speak up for themselves and make their needs known and voices heard. We spend very little time offering advice and more time offering encouragement and support as survivors grow in their own sense of freedom and empowerment. In the words of Sister Simona yesterday, in describing Naomi's love for Ruth, we seek to love in a way that is free and freeing, capable of closeness and care, but also of making space. The fourth principle I want to highlight is mutuality and collaboration. When we describe Awake, we don't usually say we're an organization that supports survivors. Instead, we say, as you heard in the introduction, we're a community of abuse survivors, concerned Catholics, and allies. This is a very intentional choice. There is not an us and them, those who have experienced abuse and those who have not, those who are here to be served and those who are here to serve. Instead, we recognize that everyone has something to give and everyone has something to receive. We are one community walking together in a shared mission. The group of people who founded Awake were not abuse survivors ourselves, but our organization now includes survivors in all areas of leadership, staff, board of directors, program planning teams, and more. And we plan to continue growing in that direction in a spirit of mutuality. To draw on the words from Rafaela Camalota's talk yesterday, we are seeking to create a collective ethic of justice, mutual care, and freedom from domination through those principles of humility, sensitivity to religious trauma, freedom and autonomy, and mutuality and collaboration. In a moment, I'm going to tell you more about how we welcome and walk with survivors once they engage with Awake. But of course, none of that can happen if we don't connect in the first place. So much of what makes it possible for us to accompany survivors is what we do to set the stage for that first connection. As a Catholic organization, serving those who have been harmed by Catholic leaders, we cannot assume that survivors will trust us. In fact, we recognize that survivors have good reason to distrust anyone who is Catholic, so we focus very intentionally on earning their trust, on being people who are worthy of trust. If they do eventually choose to trust us, we must recognize and treasure that gift of trust and do everything we can not to betray that trust in any way. Here are a few simple things that we have done to make that move toward making that first connection. Very simply, we have a clear website with extensive information about everyone involved in leadership with Awake, our mission, our core values, and lots of frequently asked questions so that any survivor who visits the website can find lots of information about who we are and what we do without ever having to reach out directly. That website also includes information about each member of our survivor advisory panel, as well as over 30 survivor stories. This allows those who have experienced abuse to read about a wide variety of fellow survivors, perhaps feel a little bit less alone, and that maybe there is a place for them here. We host public events that are held on Zoom and are open to anyone who wants to participate. Those educational and prayer events are often the first way a survivor connects with Awake, a way for them to check us out and decide if this is something worth getting involved in. In fact, there are times that a person has registered for numerous public events with us, but only after attending 3 or 4 times did they share that they are an abuse survivor themselves, because only then did they decide that maybe they could trust us. Basically, we try to communicate in every way possible that we are a survivor-centered organization and that all are welcome. But in the end, all we can do is open the door. Then we have to wait and let each survivor decide if they want to walk through that door. Awake's offerings for survivors have grown very organically as we simply get to know survivors and their different needs, and then strive to meet those needs as best we can. So to describe our model of accompaniment, I think it would be helpful to share how each aspect of this accompaniment emerged over time, along with some words from survivors about how this has impacted them. I share what we do simply as one example of what is possible. We certainly don't have this all figured out, and I am sure there are many other examples of meaningful accompaniment, including by some of you here in this room. But I hope it might share some ideas for it might spark some ideas for what accompaniment of abuse survivors could look like in your particular context. As I mentioned before, many survivors first connect with Awake by reading information on our website or social media or attending one of our public events, which they can do without identifying themselves in any way. In the early years of our organization, though, more and more survivors started reaching out and asking to talk, so we began to do what we now call welcome calls with each survivor. The welcome call is simply an individual Zoom call where our survivor care coordinator, Esther, who is an abuse survivor herself, gets to know each person and their story and invites them to connect with Awake in a deeper way. The welcome call communicates to each person that they are valued and heard as an individual, and it allows them to ask questions so they can connect in the way that's best for them. After some time doing these personal welcome calls with survivors, as well as some ongoing individual conversations, we realized there was a need for something more, that one-on-one support was only one piece of the puzzle. Our survivor circles were born from that realization and the sense that connecting survivors with one another would be a powerful vehicle for support and healing. These survivor circles are a specially designed peer support group led by an Awake staff member and a survivor volunteer. Each circle meets once a month on Zoom, and the same group of people meet regularly for a session of 4 or 5 months so that they can grow to know and trust one another. We currently have 5 monthly survivor circles, each with about 8 to 10 participants. Even though there is an assumption in the United States that most survivors of abuse in the church are male, we actually have many more women than men involved with our circles. Most people return and participate for many sessions in a row. One survivor in our community calls the survivor circles his maintenance plan for a healthy life, even after experiencing a lot of healing over the decades since his abuse. I have heard it said that abuse happens in isolation, but healing happens in community. And that certainly seems to be the case for many of the survivors who participate in our circles. One woman commented that this is the only place in her life where she feels like she doesn't have to explain herself, that everyone just gets it. Another simply said, "I no longer feel alone." As we got to know survivors through our circles and they connected with one another, we began to hear people saying, "I'm so glad we can have Zoom so we can talk to people from all over the country, but sometimes I really wish we could be together in person." And we also sensed that many people were longing for a more extended time with one another to really focus on community and healing without all the distractions of daily life. So 3 years ago, we held our first weekend retreat for abuse survivors, with survivors coming from all over the country to spend time on a retreat with a gentle spiritual theme. We will hold our third retreat for survivors next month, and this retreat has quickly become the highlight of my year because of the amazing things God does in our time together. One participant in a previous retreat said this: "On this retreat, I was able to experience genuine spiritual healing, which I carried home with me. The compassion and understanding I received on the weekend touched me deeply." As we heard in the summary of the online group activities, so many people who have experienced abuse face silence, shame, and a struggle to speak. So we try to create pathways for people to overcome this silence and tell their stories if they feel drawn to do so. If a survivor wants to tell their story publicly, there are often few paths available, most often a personal blog or a social media post, or by speaking with a member of the media. So we wanted to create an opportunity for someone to speak about their journey publicly, but in a way that centered their voice and allowed them to retain control over what was published. Since we launched the Survivor Stories feature on the Awake website, more than 30 survivors from a diverse variety of experiences and backgrounds have shared their abuse story and the rest of their journey, many doing this for the first time. Survivors are able to work with a compassionate, trauma-sensitive editor who helps them to share their story in a clear way, and we don't publish anything until they approve the final version. If you are interested, you can read stories on the Awake website at awakecommunity.org. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to speed through my last points. While there is much more I could say about Awake's model for accompaniment, I'm sure everyone here is ready for a break. So I just want to highlight one final and important aspect of Awake's approach, which goes back to the theme of mutuality and collaboration I mentioned earlier. Many survivors I know have a deep desire to share their gifts with others and to be able to bring something good out of the terrible things that have happened to them. And we recognize that those who have experienced abuse have valuable wisdom to share, not only with with fellow survivors, but with the whole Awake community and also with the wider church. So over time, we have built more and more opportunities for survivors to lead, serve, and offer their insight to others. I've already mentioned that many survivors have moved into leadership positions on Awake staff, board, program teams, and facilitating survivor circles. We also have a survivor advisory panel made up of 12 survivors who offer feedback and guidance on major decisions for our organization. And we intentionally invite people from a variety of perspectives so that we get a more comprehensive picture of how these decisions might impact different survivors. There are many more ways we invite survivors into leadership, and I would love to tell you more if you want to talk on a break sometime. Obviously, each survivor engages with Awake in their own way, based on their own needs and preferences. Some have participated in all these pieces of accompaniment, from a welcome call to survivor circles, to telling their story publicly and stepping into leadership and service. Others simply want to participate in one aspect of Awake. Either way, we pair all of these programs and communal offerings with a continued attention to each individual, checking in on how they're doing and affirming that they matter and we care. That is what is at the core of our approach to opening the door and accompanying those who choose to walk through it, doing everything we can to communicate to each survivor that their experiences matter and that we are committed to walking with them no matter what. In that way, we hope to model the unconditional love of God, who we know loves and cares for them, even if those who claim to represent God communicated something very different. I know that I shared a lot here today, especially at the end of a very long and full schedule. I want to end just briefly by returning to Nicole, and then I promise I'll stop, who I spoke at the beginning of this talk. So when Pope Leo XIV was elected, survivors in our community expressed a desire to communicate with him. And so over the past few weeks, we have been collecting letters to Pope Leo, and we collected them into a book that I could bring with me to Rome and try to pass along to the Pope. We ended up collecting 37 letters, and one of them was written by Nicole. The words she wrote to Pope Leo seem like a perfect message for all of us gathered here today. So I will end with those words as an encouragement to each one of you. This is what Nicole says. Please, I am begging you to take this crisis seriously. Meet with the survivors. Listen to their hearts. Let the Holy Spirit guide you in making real change in the Catholic Church. We need you to provide support for current survivors and to be committed to protecting God's people in the future. I pray that you will be an instrument of healing. May you receive the grace to live up to Christ's call to serve. Thank you.